Microscopic Milton is very small indeed. He lives in a clock on the mantelpiece in the parlour of a house that belongs to a lady named Mrs. Witherspoon. No one knows he's there, apart from Milton's friend Douglas, who spends most of his time asleep in front of the fire, and of course, you. It was a warm summer's day, and Milton and Douglas had decided to have lunch in the garden. They were having jam sandwiches, one of their favourites. Unfortunately, they weren't the only ones who liked jam. "It's no good," said Milton. "These flying bugs are ruining my lunch." "You mustn't annoy them," thought Douglas. "That's how people get stung." But Milton had had enough. "A direct hit," shouted Milton. "That'll teach him." "Oh dear," thought Douglas, "you shouldn't have done that." Milton had made the bee very angry indeed, and it flew straight back to its hive. "Ha ha!" laughed Milton. "We won't be seeing him again." "I wouldn't be too sure," thought Douglas, as the bee reappeared, and another, and then another. "Ah!" exclaimed Milton. "He's coming back with an army. Run for it!" Douglas didn't like running, but under the circumstances he thought it best. "Oh, I've never been to the vet's before," said Milton. "It's very exciting." Douglas didn't agree. "I'd better wait here when you go in to see the vet," said Milton, "just in case he examines behind your ears." Just then a voice on the loudspeaker said, "Mrs. Witherspoon and Douglas to surgery, please." "Come along, Douglas," said Mrs. Witherspoon. "We'll soon have you better." Milton jumped onto a chair as Mrs. Witherspoon took Douglas in to see the vet. "There are animals here I've never even seen before," thought Milton. "I must have a closer look." "How do you do?" said Milton to all the animals. "My name's Milton." He was just about to say hello to a white mouse when he accidentally stood on the mouse's sore tail. The mouse squeaked very loudly. The owl heard the mouse, and as we all know, owls eat mice. It flew towards Milton and the mouse, who ran for their lives. Suddenly a cat noticed the owl and pounced. The big dog saw the cat, and the whole thing began to get out of hand. "What on earth is going on out there?" said the vet. "Sounds like someone has started a riot." "And I can guess who," thought Douglas. Later that afternoon, Milton and Douglas were sitting in the garden feeling sorry for themselves. "You were right, Douglas," said Milton. "Annoying bees can be very dangerous indeed." Just then Mrs. Witherspoon appeared. "You poor dog," she said. "You've had such a terrible day. I thought I'd make you a special treat for tea. Jam sandwiches." "Sometimes, Douglas, you can be a very strange dog," sighed Mrs. Witherspoon as she went back into the house. Microscopic Milton is very small indeed. He lives in a clock on the mantelpiece in the parlour of a house that belongs to a lady named Mrs. Witherspoon. No one knows he's there, apart from Milton's friend Douglas, who spends most of his time asleep in front of the fire, and of course, you. It was a stormy summer's day, and Milton and Douglas were playing in the garden when the rain started to fall. They ran into the summer house to shelter. The rain stopped as suddenly as it started, and Milton and Douglas peered out into the garden. To their amazement, they saw a little man, dressed all in green, digging holes in Mrs. Witherspoon's garden. "Oi!" shouted Milton. "Who are you, and what do you think you're doing?" Hello, hello," said the little man. "My name's Clooney, and I'm a leprechaun from dear old Ireland." "A leprechaun?" exclaimed Milton. "The little people, there's no such thing." "Oh, there is, replied Clooney. "And I'm here to find a crock of gold. You see, at the end of every rainbow lies a crock of gold. And that last rainbow ended right here." Or was it over there? Mrs. Witherspoon isn't going to like this, thought Douglas. Or maybe it was here. "So," said Milton, for want of something better to say, "what brings you here?" "There's a big shortage of rainbows in Ireland at the moment. Dear old Ireland, my beautiful Emerald Isle." "Do you get the impression he's homesick?" said Milton. "I won't say so," thought Douglas. Nothing that Milton could say or do would convince Clooney to stop digging up the garden. Eventually it started to get dark, and Milton invited Clooney to spend the night in his clock. One night turned into 2 nights, and 2 nights turned into a week. Every day Clooney dug up more of Mrs. Witherspoon's garden. Each night Clooney stayed up very late and told Milton all about Ireland. The following morning, Milton was up very early. He stood on the edge of the mantelpiece and shouted, "Wake up, Douglas. I have a plan," continued Milton. "Today is St. Patrick's Day, and we are going to throw a party for Clooney." "But didn't we want him to go home?" thought Douglas. "Believe me," said Milton, "he'll be so homesick by tea time that he can't wait to leave." Soon the party was underway. There was lots of Clooney's favourite food, including seaweed and potatoes, and there was lots of Irish music. Some slow, some fast, some happy, and some sad. At last the party was over. "Thank you," sobbed Clooney, who was getting a bit over-emotional. I had a